Okay, welcome back again. Video 2, re-record, since I didn't have audio on the first time I did this. It saved you a minute and a half, the first video that I recorded. Maybe it'll save you more time. Let's look at the lecture and go over the main points of this week. So the lecture is right here on Blackboard. And if I make this bigger where we all can see it a little better, I'm going over really the rough highlights. I don't have a lot of time to go over this in detail. So let me see if I can just really wrap this up concisely for you, save us all some time. This report writing, let me give you a preface for this. So communication of statistical results. We are ethically required when we perform, at least in the counseling field and psychological assessment field, when you perform a psychological assessment or give somebody a test, you are ethically bound to provide that person with the results of that test. You need to communicate those in a way that your client or your patient or the person can understand. These are things that are ethically required. We are bound to give an accurate and fair, honest, an understandable report to the folks that we just did our assessment with. That's the premise, the underlying idea behind this module. It's also a little bit behind the idea of the assignment that you're doing. Now, the assignment that you're doing is goes a step deeper because you're actually assessing the assessment itself. You're not looking at what the assessment said about a person. There are very clear considerations that we need to take into account when we're assessing a person psychologically. The outcomes, as you all noted earlier in the semester, the outcomes of these psychological tests, or whether it's intelligence, whether it's achievement, whether it's personality, whatever it is, can be helpful, or they can also be hurtful, especially if they're not framed in a therapeutic way. When you give a person a psychological assessment, unless you're a forensic examiner, I'm not training any of you to be forensic examiners. This is a class where, well, I guess you could say, you could argue that if you're an MGP student, okay, we can edge toward, I don't know what that message was. I got some message from Zoom. Hopefully there's audio. We can edge toward more forensic, more objectivity. But in those cases, even if you're doing a study using a psychological tool, a psychological assessment, a psychological instrument, you're still getting voluntary permission from that participant to use the results, to take the results, and it's in an anonymous way. So even when somebody takes one of these surveys, let's say it's the PHQ-9, which is a measurement of depression. Let's say, even though you're taking these surveys as online as a participant, your results are confidential, and you're also, in a way, waive your right of getting those. That should be in your disclosure statement, of getting those results back. So anyway, those are some ethical ideas that we need to keep in mind. 3 bullet points: clear and concise reports. I had the privilege of preparing hundreds of these over my career, using a range of different psychological assessments, whether it be the Milan Personality Inventory, or whether it be MMPI results, whether it be several different addiction severity assessments, substance abuse subtle screening inventory, ASI, Ohio risk assessment. There are different ways of assessing people up front. I can tell you, in all of my experience, these examinations, these psychological instruments, were given as a way of supporting the human that we're giving them to. In other words, I'm not trying to just hang this person out to dry. Even if their assessment comes back, antisocial personality disorder, and child welfare has, sent this person to me, in the end, I'm making a judgment that, if this person, or not a judgment, I'm sorry, scratch that. If I could rewind that and take that out of the context of this conversation, you have a professional duty to interpret these tests and to give suggestions based on the ideas behind these tests. First off, no test is 100% accurate or valid. Secondly, when we say things like, let's just use the ACT, for example, a person scores 15. This person will not be successful in college based on their ACT score. This person will not be successful in college. There's an example in your notes. I challenge you to go through because I don't have time to talk about it, but there's an example in this lecture of a different way of framing something like that. How you frame the results is very important. And so you want to be ethical and you want to interpret statistical findings for non-specialist audiences. I went into a lot of detail in my first video. I hate to not go into that same amount, but please read over this very carefully. I tried to make this as condensed as possible, but also cover the main points. The one thing that I want to point out here is all tests have limitations, so avoid overgeneralizing the results. Let me just highlight a couple of them. For instance, here's what I was talking about. Based on the client's low scores on the cognitive ability test, they're unlikely to succeed in college. Woof. Wow. Okay, looks like you don't need to go to college. Maybe try something like this. The cognitive ability test scores suggest the client might benefit from academic support services to help them adjust to the demands of college coursework. What's the difference between those two and how they're stated? One is stated in a way that gives a person support. The other one stated in a way that highlights the person's deficits. Again, this is talking about therapeutic language. In what way can we benefit the person? Avoid technical jargon, statistical terms like p-value and ANOVA. You need to know what those are, but your audience isn't going to know what those are. Your audience didn't take a stats class. So use clear, concise, everyday language your audience can grasp. So instead of, getting bogged down into p-value or ANOVA, how about, this is really important. I've used this before. Use like percentages. And so, maybe even show like a bell curve. If you're talking about somebody's math performance and you want to show where they lie in a percentile of 100 fifth graders, okay, where is their math performance? If they're in the 4th percentile, that means that 96 other students in their age range perform better than they did on a math test. That's important to know. And you're like, wow, that's just as damning as this statement. I would argue no, because that gives a very clear idea of what you're looking at as a researcher and say, okay, what can we do? What strategies can we use to help improve this person's math performance? Talks a little bit about storytelling. I didn't necessarily use storytelling so much. I did have, and I'll speak to this, and this will be the last thing for this lecture. I did develop templates over the years where if I had a battery of tests I was giving to an individual or a client coming in, I've probably already given that numerous times, or this battery of tests numerous times to other clients. And so what I would do is I would a lot of times, yes, I have this outline or this template, but then go in and specify exactly how this person met this subscale in this particular instrument, how this person did in this measurement. And then, so in other words, I keep that template in mind where it's not reinventing the wheel every time. And I can go back and I can pull up that Word document. Now, here's the trick for that. I have seen unethical practices in reporting in that people don't take time to specialize and individualize their reports. They get lazy, they get really busy. This is their 10th client of the day. They're worn out. And so they just publish, they send out this report and it's got another client's name on it, or it's got another client's information on it. That's completely unethical. That's in the worst case scenario, that's a HIPAA violation and could be, thousands of, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of fines. In another situation, maybe it's FERPA violation, you're just giving out inaccurate information, which is not ethical either. So when you do these tests, if you get stuck, and you get stuck, I actually didn't mind the assessments because it was something that I found valuable. I worked with a psychologist in town. His name was Dr. Close. Worked with him for many, many years, particularly when I was at Meadow Lake Hospital. And it used to be that that the healthcare in Oklahoma would pay for every child that got hospitalized, because you're taking thousands of dollars for somebody to get hospitalized because they're not safe to be walking around in society. Kids that went to Meadow Lake Hospital or other psychiatric facilities in the state were a threat to themselves, were a threat to other people. So my gosh, let's take a look at them while they're safe, while they're in this environment, and let's see what's really going on with them. And so the state would pay for a psychological assessment for every child that came in. I was so privileged early in my career to see a really gifted psychologist give just an aptitude, just different, a whole wealth of psychological batteries, assessments, projective tests, cognitive tests, personality tests, trauma, Asperger, all these different assessments, spending hours with the child. And so what would happen at the end of these assessments, spending 3 hours with each kid, would be like this 5-page document, a very concise, very clearly written ideas for helping the child where they're at in all these different areas of function. That's to me, when I was working in that situation and seeing, literally tens and 20 and probably up to 100, maybe over 100 of these assessments on children, and seeing then what it looks like in real life. I agreed most of the time with what this professional would put out there, probably 95% of the time, to give a nice statistical number. But it can be really invaluable, because then you look and you see and you know where you need to go. And that's where these assessments can really be beneficial. But you have to do the things in ethical ways. And so one of the things that I never saw from Dr. Close was a repetitive, like, oh, this is somebody else's client's name in here. This is somebody else's mother's name in here. There was very great care even before, all the AI tools that we have to help us, catch our mistakes. There was great care taken to produce every one of these reports. So when and if you do this, take great care to make sure that your reports reflect what are in the lecture this week.